Welcome to Sounds of Resistance. Russian President Vladimir Putin is losing more and more every day in his gamble. He rolled his first dice on February 24th and lost his first gamble as the Russian army rooted around Kiev retreated from the center of Ukraine. He then headed to Donbass to declare victory for his own people. But the second dice did not roll in his favor. Later, while the Ukrainian armed forces which carried out its first major offensive against the Russian army in Kherson tasted the victory, it was understood that Russia had allies on its side, especially Kadyrov, who is seen as one of Putin's right-hand men, trying to help Putin with very serious support. However, this aid has brought with it constant problems since the first day. Chechen fighters who came to Ukraine went to Ukraine in battalions because they experienced the oppressive attitude of the Russians themselves. Those who remained on the Russian side had problems with the Russian soldiers at the front. But Kadyrov also had bigger problems. Because of his support for Putin, Chechens started to oppose Kadyrov more and more every day, and everything started again for Kadyrov. Especially after the recent events, this situation has increased. The sudden night operations organized by the Ukrainian armed forces continued without letting the Russian army breathe. The Russian army, which received great wounds, found the solution to escape and even left their weapons on the battlefield. The scandalous defeats of the Russian troops, one after the other, had serious repercussions in the Russian administration. Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin administration were considering how to cover up the casualties on the battlefield. But the Russian people and the opposition parliamentarians in the Russian parliament were now aware of the facts. Putin's opponents and anti-war Russian parliament members thought that Putin was one of the biggest threats to Russia. The petition prepared by the members of the Russian parliament in the past weeks against Putin, which contained major accusations such as treason, pointed out that Putin had done serious harm to Russia. The Russian people, on the other hand, could show their reaction by taking to the streets every night to protest with Putin and anti-mobilization banners. However, Russian leader Vladimir Putin also limited the anti-war protests. Around 1,800 Russian citizens who protested against Putin and mobilization across Russia were detained by the Russian police. A judicial investigation was launched against the detained Russian citizens, and it was claimed that they would even receive heavy prison sentences. The Russian leader, who has managed to silence all those who oppose him, received an unexpected blow from the closest. Chechnya leader Ramzan Kadyrov, whom Putin sees as his adopted son, made a striking decision about the mobilization announced in Russia. Kadyrov uttered his words that would shake the world agenda while meeting with the Russian leader at the Caucasus meeting of Russia's Special Military Operations Center in Ukraine. The Chechen leader announced that Putin's mobilization decision will not be implemented in Chechnya. After this statement, which turned the world agenda upside down, Russian leader Vladimir Putin could not hide his surprise. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov stated that he sent 20,000 Chechen soldiers to the Russian fronts in Ukraine, and Kadyrov emphasized that they sufficiently support the mobilization decision announced by the Russian leader. The Chechen leader continued his shocking words. "We developed the mechanism and we used it even before the mobilization announcement. There are also thousands of volunteers in the country, and they will be used if necessary." Kadyrov stated that he had detained 130 female citizens in Grozny who organized protests against the Ukrainian-Russian war. The women were taken into custody, accompanied by the Chechen police, to the Grozny City Hall. Stating that the investigation process has started against the detained Chechen women group and that these women will be sent to fight in Ukraine together with their relatives, Kadyrov did not forget to intimidate the citizens of his country. Ramzan Kadyrov, who established an empire of fear and terror in Chechnya, just like the authority state his spiritual father established in Russia, deprived his citizens of their right to decide freely. With the words, "All Chechens who oppose being sent to war in Ukraine will be considered traitors." The repression policy of the Russian leader Putin in Russia, which is similar to it, has attracted a lot of reaction from many world states. Considering that Ramzan Kadyrov sent troops to Ukraine and supported the Russians until the end, the estimates were that Kadyrov would also sign the mobilization order received by Putin. But the Chechen leader surprised everyone by opposing the mobilization decree announced by Putin, stating that the mobilization order should have been given much earlier. The Chechen leader also spoke about the recruitment of 300,000 Russian citizens into the army, which Vladimir Putin emphasized in the mobilization decree. Ramzan Kadyrov emphasized that 300,000 Russian citizens to be sent to Ukraine should be trained in groups under the supervision of Russian regional heads. Kadyrov criticized both the strategy of the Russian armed forces and the Moscow administration, saying, "In fact, if these trainings had started earlier, these 300,000 Russian citizens would be fighting in Ukraine." Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who has been quite isolating himself from the political scene lately, watches his allies slip one by one with Kadyrov's unexpected coup. The mobilization decision, which is one of its last trump cards, is moving step by step towards failure at the moment. Because after Putin gave the order for mobilization, many of the Russian citizens, especially male individuals, have already crossed the borders of Russia, taking their relatives with them. As Kadyrov stated, Vladimir Putin, who saved the cards that should have been played before, now rests completely. The Russian leader, who was eagerly awaited how he would cope with all these political risks, also purged important top generals in his army. The most important person dismissed was Dmitry Bulgakov, the Russian deputy defense minister and army general of the Russian Federation. Dmitry Bulgakov, who holds the highest military rank after Putin, is just one of the Russian leader's victims for whom he blamed the Ukraine-Russia war. Vladimir Putin, as a result of the flight of his citizens from his country due to the mobilization decree, has his eyes on students studying at Russian universities, who are not even remotely related to the war. Russian Defense Minister Shoigu stated that there will not be full-time students among the 300,000 citizens who will join the Russian army. But the appearance of Russian National Guard members, military and police vehicles this morning at Buryat State University in Ulan-Ude, the capital of Siberia's Buryatia Republic, attracted attention. It is claimed that the Russian administration sent the Russian National Guard regiment to many places of study apart from this university. Immediately after leader Putin's decision to mobilize, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu stated that the 300,000 citizens to be recruited into the army will be 1 million in the future. The Russian people, on the other hand, increased their anti-mobilization protests after Shoigu's statements, regardless of the penal sanction. At present, the draft law of the Moscow administration has entered into force. Eligible Russian citizens are expected to face serious criminal sanctions if they refuse to fight in Ukraine. Both the Russian people and the opposition members of the Russian parliament are fed up with Putin and the Kremlin administration, which is a copy of Putin in terms of political ideology. It is expected that Russia will continue to resist collectively against the pressures exerted by the Putin administration. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who portrays a unique example of oppression power, is likely to face serious problems in the future if these small Russian resistances grow into a revolution. While the Ukraine-Russia war continues to witness shocking events day by day, the Russian leader's political and military steps are putting his army, economy, and socio-economic welfare of the citizens into a worse situation than the former Soviet Russia period. We will follow the developments together. Stay cool.